Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about JavaScript cookies and HTTP cookies more generally. So if you look up MDN cookies, you can find some good documentation on what cookies are for. And they list three main purposes: session management, so for example, signing in, having your shopping cart contents, or other session details that the server needs to remember, and then you maybe could use a cookie to connect your browser to that, say, shopping cart that the server is holding for you. Or you might hold personalization, like your UI theme, like maybe if you like the red and blue color theme instead of the yellow and green color theme, that could be stored in a cookie. You also might use it for tracking, and this is one of the reasons that modern privacy-centric user interfaces will ask you about your cookie preferences, because it's a legal requirement in places like the European Union. So tracking can be done maliciously through cookies, in that a certain website can store a piece of cookie data that identifies you, maybe not your name, but just you and your behavior, and then that ID can be sent to other servers as you browse the web, um, and that can reveal information about your identity through kind of connecting multiple pieces of information um, using cookies. So these are a way of storing data in addition to local storage and session storage, IndexedDB, the file system, Access API, the origin private file system, and they're kind of the smallest one you'll typically come upon. So if you look for the max size, browsers are limited to a couple of hundred cookies and a small cookie size of a few thousand bytes. So you want to use different storage APIs if you want to put larger amounts of data. And cookies are sent with every request, so they can worsen performance, and they also can potentially invade your privacy if you have data that you want to just have inside your browser and you don't want to send that back to the server where you're getting the data from. So for example, you have a local first site that's served on GitHub Pages, and the user stores data in their browser. If you store it in the cookies, then you're going to be sending those cookies to GitHub Pages, and so that could potentially reveal a user's data to the hosting provider, like GitHub Pages in this case. They may not care about your cookies, but you are technically sending them, and there's, as far as I know, not a good way to disable that. So I'm going to show you how this works by showing a simple static app. So this is going to be an HTML file connected to a JS file, connected to the HTML is also connected to a CSS file. So this could be stored anywhere. You could serve this with GitHub Pages, or put it in a Docker container, or any kind of hosting setup that you wanted. But I'm just going to show this with an Express server. So this is some server-side code that's just going to run on my local machine to serve this public HTML folder where I have the front-end site. So if you're not in if you're not learning backend, it's not important to know the exact details of what's happening here. But essentially, I just want to be able to reveal the cookies that are getting sent inside of the HTTP request. So essentially, every time that you request one of these files, whether that's index or this index or the CSS file, that is an HTTP right here, a GET request. The method is called GET, G-E-T, for this particular place, localhost, and then the port. And there's no nested paths, so everything is on the main path. So first you get the index, and then the index asks for style, which is also at the root, and it also asks for this index.js file, which is also at the root. And so those are just served by this web server in this case. So think of this Express server that I'm going to run with npm run dev as like GitHub Pages, or as hosting, or wherever you have your website hosted. It's just a static front-end website, and this is what that looks like. So I just have a little bit of UI that comes up with a random cookie name and a random cookie value, and then when you click new cookie, it not only generates one of these, but then it throws it into the document cookies. And so I'll show you the JavaScript code for that in a second, and then you can also clear the cookies. and that gets rid of the document cookies. So if I create a new cookie and I reload the page, you'll notice that that cookie gets reloaded in this document cookie section, and that's because it's not being stored in just the memory of the JavaScript program. It's actually being stored inside the cookies within the browser. So the way that I did that is just created some different code to kind of manage the cookies inside of the front end code. So we're back into the front end code here. So this is what's running inside the browser. And essentially, setting a cookie is as simple as document.cookie equals, and then name equals value. So something like document.cookie equals a equals 4. That could be a cookie. And then you can use semicolons to add additional attributes. Like, for example, you want to specify that this should be a secure only cookie, so this only works with HTTPS or HTTP on localhost. That's also a secure context, I believe. So you can specify different aspects, but the most simple way is just to do this. And you might think that, like, normally when you set in JavaScript, you set a variable, that if there was already a value in here, that you would be replacing it. Weirdly, this is one weird case where that's not true. Setting document.cookie actually adds a new cookie rather than overwriting all the previous ones. So you don't have to fill in all the previous ones when you go and do this again. So for example, this one is going to set 2 cookies. You might think it would replace this one with this one. It's actually just going to set 2 cookies. And I can show you that by the function that happens when I click new cookie is just going to be this event listener for add cookie here. And so it's setting a cookie with expiry. So if I just do the same thing for the set cookie with an expiration date or an expiry, I can add that here as well, just to show you that that cookie gets added. So if I click new cookie, and yeah, let's see. Yeah, so I had to reload the page because this is an Express app, so I had to get the new front-end code that would add that particular cookie. But you'll see every time I do that, it's just gonna not add this again because it's the same value over and over again. Whereas this new cookie is a random cookie, so it's going to get added to it as well. But you see that just adding this a equals 4, it doesn't actually get rid of the previous cookies, it just adds a new one. So you might think, how do you delete cookies? And that's where this clear cookies function I wrote comes in. So it essentially just says go through each cookie and then set document.cookie equals a cookie with a certain name, and the value doesn't really matter because we're just trying to essentially pick the cookie out by name, and then all we do is just set the expiration date on that cookie to be a time that is before now. So 0 is something like 1970. So if I set the expiration date of a cookie that currently doesn't have an expiration date, then it will just invalidate that cookie and delete it. So I want to show you another way to look at the cookies, which is in the application tab of the site. So here I went inspect element, application tab, and then under cookies I selected this site, and then you can see all the cookies here. And so there are different attributes on these, like the domain, the path, what the expiration date is. So some of these have a 400-day later expiration date, whereas this one is just a session expiration, which means when I close the browser and reopen it, this cookie will no longer be here. So we can see that if we close the browser and then reopen it. So you can see that a equals 4 cookie is no longer there, and you would see the same thing if you checked the application tab as well, since it was just a session expiration, whereas these other ones are in 2026 and it's currently 2025, so those have not expired yet. Now you can't set an infinite expiration date. They limit this, Chrome limits this to about 400 days. And so cookies are not really a place to store something long term and forever, unless you're going to be able to update that expiration date, continually as the user uses the application. So there's a lot to cookies, these different attributes to understand, but the basics are it's just a key value store that stores inside the browser, and you can sometimes access it from JavaScript. So I say sometimes because there is such thing as an HTTP only cookie that actually provides you the security that your JavaScript code can't access the cookie. So you can still use the cookie for useful things. It's just beyond the scope of this video. But what happens here, I want to also show you when I hit clear cookies, you'll see all those cookies get deleted in the UI because it's just updated to reflect this. Now, if you're wondering why didn't these all get deleted down here, you just simply have to hit the refresh button there. They have been deleted. You just can't see that until you hit the refresh button or reload the page. But they have in fact been deleted as soon as I hit that clear cookies button, and then you can go ahead and create new cookies again. And so the last point I want to cover here is this kind of server-side connection. So I mentioned that HTTP only cookies can be not accessible from JavaScript. So that means when I say document.cookie, for example, when I'm getting the cookies to set the UI, I do this get cookies function, which just says document.cookie. It splits on a semicolon, and then I just trim the cookie and filter it based on whether it's an empty string or not. So you could see that if I do console.log document.cookie, let me go back to the browser and reload and go to the console, you'll see that the cookies are just being represented by a bunch of key value pairs, key equals value, separated by semicolons. And so it's just a big string. When you say document.cookie, it's just a big string. Now, when you have HTTP only cookies, they actually would be here in the browser view. You would be able to view them, but when you go to access them in code, you cannot access them from document.cookie. So if I had all these as HTTP only, they would be in the application tab, but when I console logged document.cookie, it would be an empty string. And so again, that's a security feature, but the reason that HTTP is so tightly intertwined with cookies is that the idea of cookies is essentially to have a piece of data that lives in your browser and gets sent on every request to the server. Now, there are ways to manually include cookies from this site. So this site is localhost 3003, and say I want to send something to api.google.com. I could actually include my cookies into a request to api.google.com, assuming that that all the settings are correct, both on my end and on Google's end. I could send cookies over that way. And so that would be a way, for example, to send maybe an advertising ID to Google to tell Google something about the users of my application for some sort of nefarious, the user is the product type reason. But I wouldn't probably want to do something like that because it's kind of an invasion of the user's privacy. But essentially, the main use case for cookies is not going to be talking to another server, like for example from localhost to Google, but rather just from localhost to localhost. So that's called a same site request. Or same origin request. A little bit of a difference between a site and an origin, but essentially what this means, so when I clear the cookies, every time I load this page, I'm actually making a request to this Express server. And like I mentioned, think of this Express server like the GitHub Pages server that serves a GitHub Pages site. So every time you simply type in localhost 3003 and hit enter, that triggers a GET request for the index file. This is the index file. The index file then calls for the JS file and the style file, so those become two more GET requests. So if I do new cookie, and I have this cookie now, and I hit reload, which is going to trigger those 3 GET requests, you'll suddenly see 3 GET requests are printing the cookies, and the 4th one is probably just some other file that's being asked for from the server that I'm forgetting about. But essentially, every time I reload the page, there's a number of GET requests that go to this server. And because I have this cookie printer, it's going to print the cookies that are inside of the HTTP request. And you can see that now in the network tab of the browser. So when I click reload, you see a bunch of HTTP requests happen. So each of these 3 requests. So for example, when I'm getting the styles file, that is a GET request. And if I scroll down here to the request headers, these are just all the metadata about the HTTP request to get that styles file. And you'll see that in here there's a cookie header, and that contains the cookie that I have on there. If I add a new one and reload, do that again, you'll see that there are multiple cookies there, and those multiple cookies get printed out also in my server side as well. And so now you can see that you don't actually have to do anything just by making requests to your same site while having cookies. You're automatically sending those cookies over to the server. And so there's lots of different use cases for this that we talked about earlier, like for example managing some sort of session that the server is keeping track of, or maybe you might keep some sort of secret in there, like some sort of data, some kind of token or something like that, that authenticates you after you've already entered your username and password, and different things like that. So essentially, in summary, as far as JavaScript cookies and not HTTP only cookies, JavaScript cookies you can set and read from JavaScript, and then they get sent on every same site, same origin request. So whenever you're talking to the server from which your front end was retrieved, you're going to be able to send all of those cookies. And in fact, as I understand, you have to send all those cookies, so you can't really opt out of that. So this is good for small pieces of data that manage things like sessions, and are not really ideal for large data storage that you don't want to expire, or sensitive data storage that you want to keep on the client side and not send to the server. So that should conclude this video. Thank you for watching.